Welcome to the lair of the Batty Boffin.
Hi there Batty fans, welcome to this Batty Boffin chemistry video all about electrolysis. It's part of the periodic table, so we're looking at some of the elements. And in this one here, we're going to be looking at some of the elements in group 7, which is over on the right-hand side, and group 1, which is over on the left-hand side. Here's a quick reminder of what the periodic table looks like. And so we're going to be looking at a method of electrolysis for extracting some of the group 1 and the group 7 elements, particularly sodium and chlorine. It also works for others, but this is sodium and chlorine. Now I've got two pictures here. One of them is kind of the more diagram type that you tend to see in textbooks, and the other one is a little bit more 3D-ish, and these are two separate ones here which are related. Now I'm going to talk about this one first over here. What we've got, drawn in red, is a big tub, and I've drawn a liquid surface on the top, and what's in there is molten sodium chloride. Molten, that's melted, so it's hot. I've written hot by the side. Sodium chloride, that's just salt. Okay, so what we've got in here is a bath of salt that's been heated until it turns liquid. So that's jolly hot there. I mean, you might tend to think of salt as being a solid, but if you take a solid and you heat it up, it will turn into a liquid. So there we've got a bath of molten liquid sodium chloride. Now, when you get sodium chloride liquid, it turns into its two ions. Okay, ions, that's I-O-N ions, not iron, the metal. The two ions. Hopefully you know about those, that these are the charged parts of atoms. Atoms with either electrons extra or electrons taken off so that they've got a positive or negative charge. If you're not sure about that, check out some of the other Batty Boffin videos on the structure of the molecule. But here we've got sodium and chlorine split into its ions. So here we've got some Na+, that's the sodium plus ion, and Cl-, that's the chlorine minus ion there. So sodium plus and chlorine minus. And they're all just kind of swimming around, and this is why we have to have it liquid, because in the solid state they are locked into a lattice and they're not free to move, whereas in the liquid state the ions can move around. So that's what the red bit is. Okay, next we've got the green bit. The green bit is now like a polo mint shape. Okay, Lifesavers, if you know America, I believe are the same thing. Polo mint shape, and it's made of metal, and it's connected up to electricity. That green line down there, to one side of a battery. It's connected up to the negative side of a battery, which means that that ring of metal is negatively charged and is therefore called the cathode. Inside that, we've a cylinder, this one drawn in blue, and that is connected up to the positive side of the battery. So that's the anode. So you have an anode and a cathode, and we always have those in electrolysis. You'll see why they're that shape in a minute. Above the anode, also drawn in blue, I've got a funnel there. If you're doing this in the lab, you probably have a test tube or something like that, but something to collect the bubbles that come off the top, and we'll work out what those are in a minute. And then around the outside, drawn in black, we've just got basically a kind of a dish thing with a pipe coming off. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a gas collecting at the anode, and I've drawn some little blue bubbles you can see there, so those will be rising up. And on the cathode we're going to be collecting a liquid, and that's going to drip down. I've drawn a couple of little drips there, and that's going to be collected in the cup, this black cup, and come off down the pipe. So here's just a quick close-up, and I'll just go through those elements again. On the outside, in red, we have a big bath full of molten sodium chloride. Inside that, drawn in green, we have a ring-shaped cathode connected up to the negative side of a battery, and that is going to be negatively charged. Inside that, drawn in blue, we have a cylinder of another metal, which is going to be the anode, connected up to the positive side of the battery, so the anode is positively charged. And above the anode is a blue funnel, and that's going to be collecting up the gas, and I've drawn some little bubbles collecting at the side of the anode. The cathode is going to be attracting something that's going to turn into a liquid, and that's going to drip down. I've drawn some little drips at the right hand side and be collected in the black cup-shaped thing underneath it and run down that black pipe. So let's see what happens, shall we? We've our sodium ions and our chlorine ions there, and the positively charged sodium ions are going to be attracted to the negatively charged cathode. So we're going to get these Na pluses all hanging around by that green cathode. So what I'd like you to do, please, now, is I'd like you to get a piece of paper and a pencil. I'm going to put this up on the board again, and I'd like you to just copy that down, and what I want you to do is draw lots of little Na pluses all next to that green cathode. Okay? Pause the video and you can do that now. Okay, so you should have this diagram with lots of little Na pluses all next to that green, and you can see as they gather together, all those little sodium ions can gather together and join up and make some actual sodium, which is this kind of green drippy bit down here. Sodium isn't actually green, that's just the colour of pen I've got. And you can see it all collecting there and running down here. So the stuff coming out of here is liquid sodium. Liquid sodium. Sodium has a fairly lowish melting point, so that's not too bad. Then you can just cool it down and turn it into your normal sodium. Okay, so the next thing to do, that's the sodium, is pause the video and write what happens to all the chloride ions. Okay, so where do they go? Sodium is attracted to the cathode. What happens to the chloride ions? Hopefully you had the chloride ions gathering up by the anode, okay, where they stick together and we get chlorine gas given off up here. Okay, there we go, Cl2. They stick together, a little bit of covalent bonding going on there. So we get chlorine gas given off here, liquid sodium given off down here, and that is the electrolysis of salt, which produces chlorine gas and sodium. So that's the first one. The second one over here is slightly different. Here we've got another bath drawn in black, full of a liquid. I've drawn the surface of that in red. And again, we've got an anode and a cathode. I've just drawn them as sticks this time, okay? And each one's got a funnel over the top, and we've got a little pipe at the bottom to get something out. So this one is not full of molten salt. This one is full of brine. Now, brine, that's basically seawater. Okay, we're talking seawater here. So first thing I'd like you to do is work out what is in brine. So brine is water and sodium chloride. Now, by the way, this also works with things like potassium chloride as well. So you can do this one with potassium chloride and get, you know, other things off there. And, you know, potassium fluoride or potassium iodide. All of these things work. And column 1 things and column 7 things generally kind of, you can substitute anything in column 1 for anything else and anything in column 7 for anything else generally. So, brine is water and sodium chloride. When we put an electrical charge through it, we've got one side, the cathode, connected up to the negative side of the battery, and the other side, the anode, connected up to the positive side of the battery. So these things are going to ionize, okay? Now we know a little bit about the sodium and chlorine. What happens to the water? So could you pause the video, please, and in this space here, write me out some of the ions, like I did there, so you can have Na plus and Cl minus, and what else? Right, here we go. The sodium chloride, we know, dissociates into a sodium ion, Na plus, and a chlorine ion, Cl minus there. Water dissociates into 2 bits. We have H plus, so that's hydrogen that's lost its electron, so it's positively charged. It's just basically a nucleus. There's not a lot to that really. And OH minus, the hydroxide ion, so it's an OH. Okay, and that's got the extra electron in it there, so that's got OH minus. So H plus and OH minus, and that's the way that water always splits, okay, into an H plus and an OH minus. So we've got some positively charged things and we've got some negatively charged things. So next thing to do is to pause the video and draw little arrows showing which things are attracted to which of the cathode and anode. Okay, we should have this. The negatively charged ions, such as the chloride and the hydroxide, are attracted to the anode. So we have Cl- and OH- forming around the anode. Around the cathode, we have the positive ions, the sodium and the H pluses there, so they're gathering around the cathode. Now, some of those things will form gases when they get together. So the next thing to do is to have a think about these bubbles that I've drawn around the anodes and the cathode. Some of the things around the cathode will form a gas which will bubble up through the funnel and be collected at the top. Some of the things around the anode, again, will form a gas. So, could you now pause the video and work out which gases are collected above the anode and the cathode? At the cathode, we've got H pluses and Na pluses. Now, sodium doesn't form a gas at this kind of temperature, but hydrogen does. So we've got H2 coming off above the cathode. And at the anode, it's actually the same as that one over there. We have Cl's forming Cl2, diatomic gases. That means they're made of two bits, H2 and Cl2. That's opposed to things like helium, which is a monatomic gas. Helium just hangs around as helium on itself, whereas hydrogen, H2, oxygen, O2, nitrogen, N2, chlorine, Cl2. So these are diatomic gases. So there we've got hydrogen and chlorine being given off. But what about all the other things? Well, they don't form gases, so we don't get bubbles of them coming off. But here's the clever bit. Once you've got your hydrogen and your chlorine coming off, you can switch off the electricity, at which point you've got these Na pluses and these OH minuses still in solution, but they're not being attracted to the electrodes, so they can kind of join together. So when you empty it out to the end, what do you get coming out of here? Again, pause the video, see if you can work out what comes out here. With the sodium and the hydroxide, we get, amazingly, sodium hydroxide coming out, which is a very useful product used in soap making, for example. NaOH, sodium hydroxide, is simply the sodium ion and the hydroxide ion stuck together by ionic bonding there. So sodium hydroxide, hydrogen gas and chlorine gas coming from the electrolysis of brine. Very, very useful. And over here, just to remember, this one was just sodium chloride, and so we got chlorine gas and molten sodium off that one there. So there's a little bit of electrolysis for you and some ways of producing some of the group 1 elements and the group 7 elements. And as I said, this doesn't have to be sodium chloride. You could do it with potassium chloride and you get potassium out, or you can do it here and you get potassium hydroxide in there. So any of the group 1 elements you can kind of swap them with any of the others, and group 7 elements you can kind of swap them with the others, and they all work fairly much the same. So I'll see you next time, battery fans, for a little more electrolysis.
Mwahaha! Mwahaha! Mwahaha!